if you pick up the newspaper, whatever newspaper it is that you read, on most days of the week you will find at least one, if not two, stories about war. These days, probably Iraq and or Afghanistan will make it onto the front page. If not both of those, maybe Yemen or Somalia or some other rivalry, India, Pakistan, China, Japan. You name it, it'll be on the front page. I think it's safe to say that if you pick up your paper tomorrow morning, whether it's the local paper or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, the headlines is not going to be all quiet on the US-Canadian border. If you pick up a newspaper in Paris, it's not going to be all quiet on the Franco-German boundary. And it's sort of self-evident why that's the case, and that is that when peace breaks out, nothing happens. When war breaks out, lots happens. There's noise, there's emotion, there's color. Everybody sends cameras and journalists. And so to some extent, it's reasonable that we pay a lot of attention to war and little attention to peace. Obviously, people go to see movies, spend $11.50 or whatever it is these days to see a movie about World War II, but you're not going to pay $11.50 to see a movie today about the Franco-German relationship, because all you'd see if you had a camera at the border are some sheep grazing. And that's because that border, long a site of bloodshed, has lost its relevance as a geopolitical boundary line. If we get in our cars tonight at 8:30 or 8:45, whenever we're done, and we all head north in a big convoy and we get to the US-Canadian border, we'll find a few customs agents and some passport controls, but you will not find the 82nd Airborne. You will not find an armored division. You will not find Canadian soldiers on the other side. Why? Because Canadians do not lay awake at night thinking that we're about to invade. We don't lie awake at night thinking that they're going to invade. Why is that? In some ways, it is a much more profound observation than the fact that the Taliban are fighting the Tajiks and the Tajiks, some other ethnic group, and the Americans going after the Taliban, because that's what happens since the beginning of time. And so what I want to discuss with you tonight is the other stuff, those magical, all too rare moments in international history when peace breaks out, when nothing happens, when countries become so comfortable with each other that they demilitarize their relationship. They keep their borders undefended. They let down their guard. They eliminate war as a legitimate tool of statecraft. That's the puzzle. So I'd like to do three things in the next 30 minutes or so. One is tell you how I went about examining this puzzle, how and when peace breaks out, tell you the story I found. Second, highlight for you what I think the most important conclusions of the study are. What did I find that you would want to take away tonight and ruminate about that may affect the way that you think about the world and diplomacy moving forward? And then I want to end by saying a few things about President Obama and his engagement strategy, because his readiness to talk to the enemy was in some ways one of the most distinguishing features of his presidential campaign and also of his time as president. Reset with Russia, reaching out to Cuba, trying to negotiate with Iran, trying to reach out to Syria. This is an unusual foreign policy. And so I want to offer some thoughts on how that outreach has gone and where it's likely to head in the months ahead. So, for starters, in trying to answer this question, when and why peace breaks out, I went back and I just read widely through history to find as many cases as I could where long-standing rivals found their way to peace. where they moved from enmity to amity. The earliest case I look at is the foundation of Switzerland in 1291, when 3 forest cantons in what is today the Alpine region, long enemies of each other, formed what became the Swiss Confederation. I look at the formation of the Iroquois Confederacy in upstate New York, which was born in 1450 in a small town that still exists today called Onondaga. When these 5 Iroquois tribes came together, they had been killing each other and eating each other, literally, for centuries. From 1450 to 1777, not a single Iroquois tribesman died in battle with another Iroquois. I look at the Concert of Europe, 1815 to 1853, a system that preserved peace among the great powers, and on up to the present day. Some cases from Latin America, from the Middle East, from Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, spread the net as widely as possible to get different cultures at different times, some states, some non-state actors, trying to figure out how these magical moments of peace occur. Let me tell you what I found. And I'm going to tell you what I found by just telling you the story of one particular case. And that is the case of the United States and Great Britain. A case which today we take for granted. The idea that somehow the U.S. and Great Britain were enemies, we've forgotten because we were partners in World War I, partners in World War II. Now we talk about the special relationship. But from 1700s, when we broke away from the British Empire, through the War of 1812, when the British kindly burnt down the White House, through the balance of the 19th century, Britain was enemy number 1. In the UK, America was enemy number 1. And we kept battleships. We didn't have any at the time, but we kept our cruisers at the ready. We had troops on the US-Canadian border. We almost went to war on numerous occasions in the 19th century. And everything starts to change in 1895. And the precipitating event is a dispute that breaks out between British Guiana and Venezuela over their border. And you may say, well, what does that have to do with Anglo-American relations? Well, what happened is that the United States, and keep in mind in the 1890s, the U.S. is coming online as a great power, sowing its oats, believing that it should have a say in the world commensurate with its growing economic power. The president dispatches a note to London which says, this dispute between British Guiana and Venezuela is in the Western Hemisphere. It is in our backyard. We believe we should have a role in this. We recommend that you take this to neutral arbitration. And Lord Salisbury discusses this with his cabinet, sees this as an affront to the pride of the British Empire, and dispatches a note back to Washington that basically says, forget about it. At this point, there's talk of war in Congress. There is a sense that the United States has been ashamed, has been embarrassed by this. There is talk of the British Empire continuing to tread where it shouldn't be, trespassing on American interests. And once talk of war is swirling in Washington, the British cabinet reconvenes. Lord Salisbury calls in the Admiralty, the Royal Navy, and says, what do we do? Are you ready to go to war against the United States? And the Admiralty goes away and looks at the disposition of forces, and it sees a rising America, it sees a rising Germany, a rising Japan. The Boers are getting uppity in South Africa. And they go back to Lord Salisbury and they say, we can't do this. There's no way that we can go to war with the United States because we don't have enough battleships. We can only do this by exposing our positions in the North Sea, in the Mediterranean, in the Far East. We can't do it. And the Admiralty therefore said to Lord Salisbury, if you can't fight them, turn them into a friend. And Lord Salisbury said, this is a very interesting idea. And he wrote a note to President Cleveland, goes back to Washington, and this note said,